Today I'd like to share about the Unite the Right rally that took place in 2017. This rally drew a lot of attention because it seemed to bring out a number of people who kind of were promoting more hatred than love. And so from a theological point of view, you kind of want to look at it and say, well, what does this rally say to us about the people of God? What does this rally say to us about our contemporary Christian scene, about ourselves as Catholics, about ourselves as citizens in this country? What is this rally? What's the meaning for us? How can we reflect on it? Recently at this rally, 17 of the white nationalist leaders and organizations were found guilty and had to pay more than $26 million in damages. And the guilt was really about the hatred that came forth from the rally and the thought that some of these organizers seemed to be intentional in trying to go after certain groups. Violence erupted at the rally. And the suit was filed by 9 people who suffered either physical or emotional injuries during the 2 days of the demonstrations. And the prosecution claimed that it was a meticulously planned conspiracy, that this wasn't just a random happening at which violence erupted, but because of the planning of this and the careful planning of this, violence was part of this particular rally. And it was orchestrated really against 2 groups of people. It was orchestrated against African Americans and against those of the Jewish religion. So there was a kind of a social dynamic, but also somewhat of a religious dynamic, which maybe kind of rolled into that in terms of the aspect of Jewish people as a religious group, but also as a social entity. Richard Spencer, who was one of those who was found guilty, he was a white nationalist, and basically his claim is the importance of preserving the white race and white traditions, that white people are being kind of targeted today and put down, and so we have to stand up for white people. And he vowed to appeal the verdict. Interestingly, there were 2 disputed counts in this verdict, and they were based on a failure to come to a conclusion concerning an interesting piece of legislation. You wouldn't think it would be part of this. It was called the Ku Klux Klan Act. It's a 150-year-old law, so it goes way back. It was passed after the Civil War, and this particular act allows private citizens to sue other citizens for civil rights violations. Interesting parallel with the Texas abortion law, right? Which allows the citizens to kind of sue other citizens. It's not a state deal, but it's a citizen initiated suit. Interesting concept in terms of this act, and even today how we have similar dynamic in legislation. And to prove this, the defendants must engage in a conspiracy to commit racially motivated violence, and that they knew about the conspiracy but failed to stop it from being carried out. So they engage in a conspiracy, and it's racially motivated violence, which it seemed to be in this particular instance. And they knew that it was a conspiracy, but they failed to stop it from being carried out. And that's a kind of a difficult count to prove, because maybe you were engaged in it and maybe you were part of it, but did you really know that this was going to be a conspiracy? How do you prove that? Difficult, and that's where the jury found it hard to ascertain that. James Alex Field Jr., one of those who was found guilty, was an avowed Hitler admirer. He intentionally drove his car into a crowd of counter-protesters. He killed 32-year-old Heather Heyer, and he injured 19 others. So he intentionally did that. And the thing was that, is this part of this conspiracy? Why did he do this intentionally? Did others know he was doing it? Did they aid him in it? These were things they wanted to discover. He was found liable, James Alex Fields Jr., on assault or battery claims. 6 plaintiffs were awarded just under $6.8 million in damages. So there were 6 who were awarded that amount. The jury awarded $6.7 million on a claim that Fields intentionally inflicted emotional distress on them. So not only the physical harm, but the emotional harm that was caused, the trauma of this particular event. Susan Breaux, Heyer's mother, said the verdict sends a very clear message that hate speech put into action has consequences. Hate speech, of course, protected by the First Amendment, freedom of speech. But then when you take this hate speech and you act on it and you intentionally do harm to people, then of course you have a situation. On August 11th and 12th in 2017, hundreds of white nationalists descended on Charlottesville. They were protesting the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, and they did not like the fact that this statue was being removed. Protesters chanted, "Jews will not replace us." They surrounded the counter-protesters and they threw tiki torches at them. So these were some of the actions that were involved with the suit. Integrity First for America funded this lawsuit. Some of the accused, Jason Kessler, the rally's main organizer, Richard Spencer, who coined the term alt-right, basically encompassing white nationalists and neo-Nazis, and Christopher Cantwell, a white supremacist. He is called the Crying Nazi. He used pepper spray against the counter-demonstrators. So these were some of the individuals who were charged. Now, the interesting thing to reflect on is, well, what does this say about us as a society? Perhaps it's just some isolated individuals who were doing some crazy things, but there were hundreds of protesters who were gathered. So a significant number of people. Does it say that maybe hatred is getting the upper hand? Hard to judge that because, again, maybe it was just an isolated event, and certainly it has not been repeated on this scale. But it's something that causes us to stop and pause and say, is there a better way? Is there a way of dialogue? Is there a way of peace? And certainly it's important to listen to the claims, the ideas that people are trying to articulate. It's sort of a cry about the situation they're in. Maybe they feel they're not being included in our country's direction. Maybe they feel people aren't listening to them. So again, a call for dialogue. But dialogue, of course, almost always should be done in a peaceful atmosphere. And so this causes us to reflect more on the need for really peaceful, healthy dialogue in our society today.